The key thing for people to understand is that dopamine is regulated by all sorts of things.
Sometimes people make the mistake of going out and pursuing more dopamine.
The curtain rises on Andrew Huberman's revelation, the power of anticipation in shaping a thrilling life, urging viewers to peer into the future for a more fulfilling and exhilarating existence.
In fact, I always like to think at any moment you should ask yourself first, are you back on your heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass? With respect to work, with respect to relationships, with respect to stress.
Always forward.
If you're always forward center of mass, think about dopamine as kind of a wave pool. So if you're always forward center of mass, you're getting waves in this wave pool. If those dopamine highs go too high, the water will splash out and that reservoir of dopamine will drop.
As the drama unfolds, Andrew Huberman shares transformative tips, promising a life upgrade for those willing to heed his guidance. A tantalizing offer for those seeking excitement and profound change.
It's going to be hard to trigger that big release because you just had the peak. Well, if you adjust that, you relax, you understand there's always a little bit of a postpartum depression. We sometimes hear about postpartum depression. That's a clinical thing, but there's always that kind of, today's not as exciting as the previous days. What am I going to do with my life? But then if you let it start ratcheting up again, then what you realize is your capacity to tap into dopamine as a motivator, not just seeking dopamine rewards, that is infinite. And people ask me this kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? How do I sleep better? How do I stop stressing? And usually I find that people are not serious, meaning they want an answer, but they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, look, it's really simple. Can you not eat until 2 p.m.? I was like, yeah, I'm not hungry in the morning. I'm like, great, drink coffee, drink water.
The spotlight shifts to the essence of focus, with Huberman illuminating the path to a more enriched life by honing in on the present, a critical element in his compelling and insightful narrative.
The key to this is, if we want to be very concrete, we should probably focus on actions. And I'll use fitness as an example because it translates to everybody, whereas people's circumstance is different. Let's say somebody really wants to take on a fitness routine. They hate running or they want to lose weight in a healthy way.
A twist in the plot, Huberman unravels the secret to accelerated fat burning, injecting an unexpected element of intrigue into the storyline, promising a physical transformation of the most exhilarating kind.
And so there's a pretty straightforward formula where when you've been asleep all night, your fuel reserves, like you've got fuel in your fat, you guys don't have any of that, but you got fuel in your fat, you've got fuel in your muscles that can be burned, and you've got fuel in your liver, it's called glycogen. And when you wake up early, all of that is as low as it's going to be because you haven't been eating anything.
Got you.
And so if you exercise then, your body starts dropping into your body fat stores quicker.
A cautionary note echoes through the storyline as Huberman warns against certain practices that might undermine one's attractiveness. A dramatic and caution-laden moment in the unfolding narrative.
I look at the plastic surgery thing now, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, maybe this just reflects my age and my generation, but I see some people with wearing so much dark eye makeup, plus they're getting the cheekbone inserts. They look like skeletons. Now that's not, listen, everyone's got their taste, especially if they're really lean, but facial structure is something that can be modified. And so chewing hard foods is something we used to do a lot more. All this slurping down of food and calories we know isn't good from the obesity side, but it's also not good from the jaw structure, teeth structure, face structure. And it's all related, So that book Jaws is amazing. People can just look it up online if they don't want to buy the book. Just do, Jaws, mouth structure, face structure, and then just go images, and you'll see these pictures. And this was known in the 1800s. There was a book called Shut Your Mouth by a British doctor who talked about the fact that people who snore, sleep like this, and then during the daytime they become mouth breathers. He said they become less attractive than the people who are nose breathers. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting, and this is like a zero cost thing, but it's not emphasized enough.
At all.
Yeah.
Senses are these cells within our body, our eye, our skin, our nose, our mouth, that are taking physical entities in the universe. They're like wavelengths of light, physical touch, and translating that into nerve signals, into electrical signals in the body. That's how the nervous system.
Senses meaning taste, feel, sight, hearing, the five senses. Gotcha.
The five senses. And people always say, well, what about intuition? That's different. That's not a sense. That's that's actually a sense of your internal world. It's called interoception as opposed to exteroception, sense of the outside world. So the 5 senses, and we are whether or not people like it or not, we are heavily constrained by those senses. For instance, a mantis shrimp, of all things, can see like 64 different shades of color that we can only see one shade of, for instance, because they have receptors that can pick out those things. Some animals can see ultraviolet emissions, others can see infrared. A pit viper can see your heat emissions. Humans sometimes think they can see heat emissions, but they can't see heat emissions unless they put infrared goggles on. Then they can. So the senses constrain our experience of the world. And I don't doubt that there are some people that have a little 0.25% more UV detection, or there's even some evidence for weak magnetoreception in humans from good labs. A little bit of, and turtles have very strong magnetoreception.
What does that mean, magnetoreception?
They can sense magnetic fields. So they sense them as, like that's magnetically. Humans have, there's some evidence written up in Science magazine if people want to look it up, which is quality journal, for weak magnetic sensing in humans. Some humans,
not strong,
but it's not strong, okay? And it's not strong in most people by any stretch.
The distinction between senses and intuition takes center stage, with Huberman dissecting the intricate layers of human perception, deepening the intrigue in this riveting and enlightening tale.
And they're very realistic, right? Yeah. I mean, as Carol will say, and other people have said in the psychology field, positive self-talk, oftentimes, unless you do it correctly, you're badly wrong. Lying to yourself won't work. Saying I'm a winner when you haven't lost or you haven't won yet is great, but that's not the most effective use of these systems.
Well, you're also being out of integrity with yourself. You're telling yourself a lie.
Right.
You're like, and then you're losing your ability to have confidence because you're just lying to yourself.
Right. And if it's really extreme, there's a name for it. It's called delusional, right? right. And people will start to point that out, and then it becomes harder to recruit people into your goals. So I think the key thing is to attach that sense of reward to the effort process. It's saying, look, I am oriented in the right direction and rewarding the things you're not doing.
The plot thickens with a revelation about the perils of positive self-talk gonarrhea, shedding light on the potential dangers of a well-intentioned practice, injecting suspense into the narrative at its most critical juncture.
And we know that you can't hold too many thoughts in mind at once. So what I will say is that it's hard to suppress thoughts, but it's actually quite easy to introduce thoughts. And it sounds to me like this law is basically a process of introducing thoughts. And when you start introducing thoughts and you start thinking of thoughts as a form of perception,
the way you view the world,
they're going to shape the way they're going to shape what you see.
Wow.
They're very going to heavily constrain what you see. Now, this has a dark side and a light side. And
Tell me.
The dark side is that beliefs are essentially thoughts that are recurring thoughts, or things that are kind of like books on a shelf that you can reach to anytime. If I say, hey, what about that book out there, Jay Shetty's book, you can go grab it because it's on the shelf right there. You can show it to me, right? It's there all the time. You know where it is, and it's very accessible.
The drama reaches its zenith as Huberman discloses the secret to mastering thought control, a crucial skill that holds the key to unlocking a more empowered and exciting life, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats, hungry for the next revelatory chapter.
For the anxiety and stress management, I'll give you some breathing, some respiration tools that work really well, that are not, woo mysticism. It's not, I'm not gonna tell you to meditate 30 minutes a day, although that's a cool practice too. I'm gonna give you some tools you can use in real time as you're working hard and dealing with whatever it is you're dealing with in life. Okay, so that ends. The conversation ends, and Greg Hunt was there too, who I knew from growing up.
Yeah.
Talked to Greg a little bit, and then a year later, Mike reaches out and says, hey man, thanks for all that stuff you gave me. I was like, oh, cool. And he's like, I lost 60 pounds and I haven't had a sip of alcohol since we talked last and feeling pretty good.
Damn.
And I was like, so how did you do it? He's like, well, I get on the bike and I pedal as hard as I can, and like someone chasing me with a syringe full of poison. Sure. And, I was like, he remembered. And I was so impressed. Like, very few people can just take the menu and just do it.
In a climactic and triumphant finale, viewers are enticed to reward themselves for taking the boldest and most challenging steps toward an exciting life, leaving them on the edge of their seats, eagerly awaiting the unfolding of the next chapter in this riveting journey of transformation.
There are also issues of sort of body type preference and safety. And by safety, I mean two different things, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
safety for the woman.
And listen, and for the man. Listen, there's a really interesting literature about this. If you look at sort of who people select to have versus who people select to try and form long-term relationships with them, I mean, there are many men who would not choose to be with the woman that is most attractive to everybody because they don't have the confidence they could keep her.
That's
right?
a good point.
Even if she's not a flirt and wouldn't be looking, right? Even if she didn't have a wandering eye. Some men deliberately wouldn't want to be with the most beautiful. People tend to match up pretty closely in terms of attractiveness. Pretty closely. Not always.
Look, I always say the beauty of being young is that neuroplasticity, your nervous system's ability to change in response to experience, to learn things, is at its absolute peak. However, you don't have that much control over your life when you're young, right? Especially when you're really young. As you get older, it gets harder to change your nervous system, but you can do it. But the advantage you have is that you can direct exactly what changes you want to happen. And so there are two different ways to change your nervous system depending on whether or not you're younger or you're older. And it's not like the gate drops right at 25. It just tapers off. But Mike made the decision, and I always say, you if somebody is an adult, you can't change their mind. Right. You literally can't. They have to make the decision to do that. And he flipped the switch.
He flipped it.
He flipped it, and he's still there. And I think he feels much better physically. And then, and I feel guilty for this, but then I started getting him really hyped about all this stuff. I was like, I started sending him athletic greens. I was like, drink athletic greens and check this out. You know, you can, I have one of those barrel saunas. So I was like, I like just like sweating all that out. And when you sit in the sauna, your heart beats and your vessels dilate. So it's a little bit like exercise, which most skateboarders don't need because they're really active.
Got you.
But as you get older, you want to keep all the plumbing working really well.
Yes, it's true that resource potential is an important variable because people have to think about safety and childcare and a number of things.
It's the only way
but women work too, right? Women can work too, right? They can opt to work and make money. But more important than any other feature across all cultures is that the woman reports that she sought someone who is kind to them. Not necessarily kind to everybody, but kind to them, right? Kind to them. Okay, so even if you think of like extreme money, right? Extreme money, or you think of extreme bodies or extreme resources, right? That somebody has. Women, in terms of who they tend to pair up with long term, assuming heterosexual, right? They're heterosexual, because here we're making a bunch of assumptions. But in that mold, what is shown up over and over again in the data is that their top priority is that someone be kind to them. In other words, they're not interested in being with someone who's really wealthy who treats them like garbage.
Is that
and
also...
I think this gets lost because people think, oh, it's all about money. It's not all about money. It's about safety and kindness, because you're talking about a long-term bond.
Right.
Now, then people say, well, what about this notion of gold diggers? And by the way, there are male and female gold diggers. I had friends in college who would say things like they wanted to marry a really wealthy woman. I was like, really? I just heard this from a few people. I was like, wow, you're thinking about that as your primary concern? They're like, no, but it would be great. I would hear people say that.